By the mid-1970s, Bruce Springsteen had skyrocketed from respected New Jersey singer-songwriter to fully-fledged international superstar. The iconic pop perfection of his third album, Born to Run, had seen him transform into a cultural phenomenon, and a decade later, the seminal Born in the USA would incredibly see him become even bigger. Yet, in the intervening years, there was a run of albums as powerful and potent as anything Springsteen has ever released. Darkness on the Edge of Town, The River, and Nebraska.
The struggle for identity and the search for self that Bruce describes on these records is lived. That's what makes them so compelling. You know, there was a kind of willingness to go there.
I think history will look back on his songwriting as much as anything else. And that's a big statement, because this is one heck of a performer.
That's the thing about Bruce, he delivers the goods. No matter how ridiculous the promise seems to be, he seems to be able to deliver on it, even today.
This film is a review of those albums, the music that was made, and the all-American icon who created it. In 1975, Bruce Springsteen had the world at his feet. Born to Run had cemented him as a fixture in the annals of rock and roll history, bringing with it a vivacious energy that captured the heart and soul of an entire era.
In the day we sweat out on the streets of runaway Mercury. At night we ride through mansions of glory, suicide machines. Sprung from cages on highway night, cold wheel fuel injected, stepping out over the line.
Born to Run is the kind of record that's very difficult for me to listen to in public because I find it so moving. There are parts of it that, to this day, and, you know, it's even a little hard to talk about. And so all of that faith that you can feel on that album is deeply, deeply moving.
In terms of what was going on at the time, rock and roll was vanishing, and you really just had, you know, pop, and you had fairly bland singer-songwriters to my mind, and they had somebody come along who sort of, you know, took what made early rock and roll great and combined it with, you know, the sound of Phil Spector. Add on top of that the sweeping romantic narratives and the stories that he tells. Yeah, I mean, I think there is a reason that it is as celebrated as it is, and it's a record I don't get sick of.
I think it's the perfect statement of what rock and roll could be. It combines the fun with the ambition, the grandiosity. It swings. It speaks to your heart. It makes your fist go up in the air. It's about sex. All rock and roll has to be about sex at some point. It was a kind of valedictory statement of what rock and roll had meant for its first 25 or 30 years. And I don't think anybody's done that as well since. So yeah, I think it deserved the hype. It's still great, you know? You put it on, it's great. Those chords, I mean, I'm kind of sick of Thunder Road. I wish you wouldn't play it anymore. But when you hear those chords, same with chords to Born to Run, same with chords to Jungle Land, it just sends shivers up your spine. There's just something great about it that is undefinable, and it's what's great about rock and roll.
Screen door slams, Mary's dress sways. Like a vision she dances across the porch as the radio plays.
It's a great album in its own way. It's overproduced, I think. And you've got the beginning there of that sort of stiff drumming sound, for instance, that reached its either high or low point, depending on your point of view on 10 years later in Born in the USA. Most of it's a marvelous album. It's still 30 years later. You can still listen to it and not cringe, which is a good acid test.
Springsteen's rise to fame at this point imprinted itself on a generation. One of the many inspired by this musical heritage was the Mendoza Line's Timothy Bracey.
I think it's a very successful album with respect to what its intentions were. I think that it's interesting that Springsteen, as opposed to his contemporaries like Lou Reed or somebody like that, who was constantly grinding against what were cultural norms here, felt the need to embrace rock and roll at that sort of baseline of Presley and Sun Records and Phil Spector and these things.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to do this little song here. It goes something like this. Well, it's all right, Mama.
When I was 9 years old, my mother had on Elvis Presley, so that was the first blast, and it was the kind of thing you'd come down and go to school, and the radio would always be on in the kitchen every morning, whatever the top 40 station was, and so she was always listening to music, and I guess the early rock and roll stations, and because I was only 9, and I remember when I saw Elvis, it affected me enough to go out and get a guitar,
Roll down the window and let the wind blow back your hair. Well, the night's busted open, these two lanes will take us anywhere.
They put a bunch of money into promoting this record. They really worked it. And then, there was this great accident of the two biggest news magazines in the country putting him on the cover in the same week, and it really was an accident, I think.
Really, I don't think anybody knew that he would become as big, as internationally huge as he did. And especially at that particular moment in time, and especially having his image on the cover of two international news weeklies, and that's only for presidents and prime ministers and such, but then you have this musician doing that. And maybe some thought it was premature. Maybe some thought he didn't quite deserve that acclaim so early on in his career.
I knew he was going to be a star when I first met him, when I asked him to come and join my band. I knew, though, but because I saw him play, I said, wow, this guy's pretty cool. He's got charisma. He has the stuff. Everybody back then knew.
He was a real phenomenon in the Northeast, in New Jersey and New York. He was very much focused in that part of the country. Here in the South, where I grew up, people didn't pay attention so much to what Bruce Springsteen was doing, but he certainly set the agenda with the Time and Newsweek thing. What a crazy year 1975 was, by the way. So the door was opened for him by the Time Newsweek covers, and he stepped right through it with that production. It just took a long time to do it.
The development of Springsteen's unique sound had also helped to transcend a comparison that had plagued him for some time, the much-feted New Dylan label.
Well, everybody made comparisons to Dylan and Van Morrison and, people like that. You could see the influences in Bruce's music, He loved that stuff.
If you want to look at Bruce Springsteen as the next Bob Dylan, if you look at that in terms of celebrity, now, I've argued in my book that Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen are in the Woody Guthrie celebrity singer-songwriter tradition. And if you look at Bruce in terms of his celebrity status, okay, I can see room, the next Bob Dylan, the next big individual act. The songwriting, I see no connection whatsoever. You can't get to Bob Dylan through a thesaurus and a rhyming dictionary. It's not available. It's an impulsive, instinctive form of expression.
John is in the basement mixing up the medicine. I'm on the pavement thinking about the government. The man in a trench coat, badge out, laid off, says he's got a bad cough, wants to get it paid off. Look out, kid, it's something you did. God knows when, but you're doing it again. You better duck down the alleyway looking for a new friend. The man in a coonskin cap.
I think without question the Dylan comparisons really hurt Bruce. Bruce was inventing a new language. Bruce was inventing a kind of new scene. It was almost this world of, working class beach culture in the North. It was nothing that anybody had paid the slightest bit of attention to.
Such hyped prominent status in the wake of Born to Run meant that Springsteen's next work was the subject of much anticipation. The bar had been set immeasurably high. The question was, would the boss be able to beat himself at his own game?
Well, I think that Springsteen probably might say that the aftermath of Born to Run is a classic illustration of be careful what you wish for. And of course, we all have dreams, and a few of us are lucky enough to realize our dreams. I don't think any of us fully know what realizing a dream means, and that you simply can't get your mind around or fully understand that there are prices to be paid, that there are costs that are imposed.
To Springsteen's credit, he had his own vision, and I think it took a lot of courage for him to say, no, I'm not going to do Born to Run 2. I'm going to go in my own direction and do my own thing and write and perform the songs that I want to do. And he did, and it turned out great. But I would imagine it's probably a very scary thing for him to have done at that time, with so much pressure mounting, to do it the opposite way, to be more commercial.
It's funny. Born to Run comes out at the very dawn of punk. In the intervening 3 years, there really have been a lot of other things to think about besides Bruce Springsteen. We're very happy for him. We regard him as one of the good guys. We go to see his shows. So we weren't worrying that much. It was not as if this was a subject of obsessive gossip, at least not in my world.
We've done Born to Run, and it meant a lot to a lot of people, and a lot of people supported me on that thing. A lot of people in the English press did, and a lot of people in America. There was a lot of supporters that really helped get it out. And there's a pressure of not wanting to let them down, and you don't want to let yourself down, and you're testing yourself to see what you got, what you got to give. So those pressures are the main pressures that I felt.
Another defining factor in the interim between albums would be Springsteen's managerial troubles. The replacement of early mentor Mike Appel with new face and Born to Run producer John Landau.
In terms of pressure that he was feeling, I think the majority of it came from what was going on with his management situation at the time. From 75 to 78, there was Bruce's loss of innocence. I think he was always very driven, knew what he wanted, didn't want to compromise, and when something got in his way that he couldn't really do anything about, I think that hit him pretty hard. And that's something being the dispute with Mike Appel, his first manager.
Well, there was a lot of difficulty in Bruce's life between Born to Run and Darkness on the Edge of Town. There was a lawsuit with his original manager, Mike Appel. And there aren't many legal documents that are particularly affecting to read. But if you go and search out some of the stuff like Bruce's depositions, Bruce was out of his mind at this trial. The lawyer would ask a question like, well, how could you say that Mr. Appel didn't look after your career? He arranged for you to perform at this state fair in a tent, in this place, and it was a very lucrative gig. And Springsteen would say, would you practice law in a tent? That's the kind of attitude he brought to this situation. And what was at stake in that trial for Springsteen was Landau. In Landau, he had discovered a kind of intellectual soulmate.
I think Landau was the strategist behind Bruce's early career. If John Landau is the Svengali behind Bruce, I say bully for John Landau.
I want to do this song because it's a good example of just pop songwriting, which I like to do a lot. I do a lot of other things, but I've always enjoyed doing this, and even though I tend to want to throw these songs all out directly into the trash can, Mr. Landau usually steps in here and says, no, not that one.
Landau has been Springsteen's manager and producer for 33 years. That's And this is a creative relationship. It's not just a business relationship where some smart manager finds a good artist and does a good job by them. Landau is a producer. And that relationship has lasted for much longer than either of them had been alive when they'd met. And that's remarkable and completely praiseworthy. And they are both, it seems to me, as people in the rock and roll business go, exceptionally honorable.
They're tight, and John wants something done, it gets done. Same with Bruce, who's the boss. You know who the boss is. That's Bruce. Landau's not his boss by any means.
The culmination of all this turbulence would manifest itself in Darkness on the Edge of Town. Released in June 1978, the development from the freewheeling spirit of 3 years previously would be immediately apparent.
See, what happened was we had 3 years where we were out of commission, really, because of the legal thing. But during that time, we were doing small tours. We toured down south, and we toured the Midwest, and different parts of the country. And that's how we were keeping everybody, staying alive, keeping the band, paying everybody's rent and everybody's, things they needed. And so we were playing during that time. We did, I think, 4 tours during that 3-year layoff. And then took about 11 months to do the album.
I've been working real hard to get my hands clean. I'm trying to steal from my graduate to buy you a gold when I'm pretty disciplined.
Born to Run largely is a very optimistic, hopeful record. And I think Darkness on the Edge of Town is the flip side of that, and very aptly named. And I think Darkness, as a teenager, I probably connected with that record on an emotional level more than anything.
Still great music for a high school kid who wanted to hear sort of romantic truths, sort of de-romanticizing romantic truths. And also it's great music for putting your fist up in the air at a concert and feeling that rock and roll is an incredibly powerful and yet incredibly intimate connection, a kind of religious feeling. So I don't think it matters so much that it's a little bit darker than Born to Run. I think he's a little bit older. It's okay. That's what life is.
Darkness on the Edge of Town is an album where a young man realizes that the world is not his oyster, and that the sense of confidence and purpose and even entitlement that sometimes marks a young person's life gets a rude awakening. And I think that Darkness on the Edge of Town is sort of Springsteen's recognition of a kind of rude awakening. Darkness on the Edge of Town is a kind of grim record in many ways, defined by a sense of resistance to an outside forces conspiring or seeming to conspire against someone's aspirations. That I think really fuels that record and defines the anger that characterizes a lot of the songs.
The songs themselves wove a murky and downbeat tapestry. 10 expertly structured tales of regret and failure.
Darkness on the Edge of Town is as systematic an expression as any record you'll ever see from any artist. It is a 3-act expression that unfolds in direct order with an epilogue following. That's the title cut, Darkness on the Edge of Town. The first act, he creates the situation and its rationale. And that would include Badlands, Adam Raised a Cain, and the very important Something in the Night. Badlands opens up telling us, okay, look at what we have here. Look at where we are. Look at how horrible this is.
I believe in the love that you gave me. I believe in the faith that can save me. Believe in the hope and I pray that someday it may raise me above these badlands. You gotta live everything. The broken heart stand to pass you gotta pay.
why is this way? Why are we in this situation? Then he answers it with the next song, Adam Raised a Cain.
Something like Adam Raised a Cain, there's sort of tough hue and quality about it, almost chilling, sort of existential dread that I like an awful lot.
He's got the sins of his fathers running through his veins, and it's a socioeconomic caste system. This is the way it's going to be. No matter what happens, Adam raised a Cain. Got the same blood flowing through my veins. We're stuck with this. And then with the third song, Something in the Night, really is the major turning point in the reckoning phase. And Something in the Night, these characters go out in their hot rods for one last race, and it all falls apart. They go out for one last ride. They make it to the borderline, to the county line. Their cars get torched. Their dreams get torched. It is all over. The story is over at this point with Something in the Night. But Springsteen decides to pour a little more salt in his character's wounds. And we come out with Candy and Racing in the Street.
To me, the moment of real genius and majesty is Racing in the Street. He has talked about his men and women songs, and he's talked about how he sort of avoided writing about that for a long time. But Racing the Street is such a sort of raw and realistic and sad portrait.
I wanna blow 'em off in my first heat. Summer's here and the time is right for racing in the street.
Racing the Street to me kind of seems like the reality of Thunder Road. I mean, Thunder Road is such a wonderful, majestic, optimistic song. When it comes down to it, it's not things that are happening, it's things that are going to happen. We're going to do this and we're going to do that and we'll get there and I'll take you there. But none of that stuff actually happens in the song. And so in Racing in the Street, you're confronted with a possible reality for, what can happen to your dreams and, despite your best intentions and despite what you want out of your life, this is something that can happen. That, to me, was a really powerful thing to hear on Darkness. To hear somebody with, as much passion and drive and optimism, really look at the harder things, the gritty things, the realistic things.
And start dying little by little, piece by piece. Some guys come home from work and wash up and go racing in the street.
Working class people have a kind of existential crisis, I think, was what that song is about. Some guys, they just give up living. They die little by little, week by week. Some guys come home from work and wash up and go racing in the streets. That sense of that desire for sensation, that desire for I'm going to find my way to elevate myself, to experience thrill. You're not going to crush me.
Okay, you have a choice. You can either just wallow in your life, or you can go home, clean up, and go racing in the street. But something happens in Racing in the Street that is important to note, and that's the suffering woman. You may remember the scene in the song where he races a guy in a Camaro from Los Angeles, and he beats the guy in the race, and he gets his girlfriend. And what a girlfriend she is. If you remember, it goes on talking about how she hates her life. One of the lines is she sits on her porch and hates for being born. Well, who the hell hates for being born, right? But in this particular song with this woman, he introduces a whole new development to his story, the suffering woman. So in Darkness on the Edge of Town, we see that the dream of a better life, everything being given to you, is ending. It's not there. We could be stuck to work in those factories, just like our parents. And boy, what a dirge factory is. I mean, men leaving work with death in their eyes.
End of the day, factory whistle cries. Men walk through these gates with death in their eyes.
There was also a maturing on Darkness at the Edge of Town. If you take a song like Factory, I think before that, Bruce saw this working class world that he came out of as just kind of a bunch of losers, like his parents or the guys who worked in the factory. As he would say in a later song, they ain't gonna do to me what I watch them do to you. you know, that it was solely something to escape. Whereas in a song like Factory, you see Bruce developing a kind of sympathy for these guys and a sense of the dignity of their lives.
Somebody's gonna get her tonight. The working, just the working life. 'Cause it's the working, just the working life.
Springsteen goes on, I think, foreshadows Nebraska when he says, somebody's going to get hurt tonight. This is going to erupt into violence. And so we see all this not working, even though those anthems are still there. But in the epilogue for Darkness on the Edge of Town, the title cut, what a pitiful thing. I mean, he has this ex-girlfriend who's done well, and he says, look, if she wants to find me, I'm underneath the bridge outside of town.
Darkness itself, I think, the title track itself is, if I had to choose a favorite from that album, that would be it. Because I think Springsteen, the lyricist, is coming into his own at that time. And he is telling stories, whereas before, maybe he told stories in a more Shaggy Dog way before, but this is more concise. And I think Springsteen, the concise storyteller, is coming to the forefront. And for that reason, I like that particular song.
What we have here is this fantasy that life was going to somehow give you all the materialistic rewards that you want. And when that doesn't come home to roost, all hell breaks loose. And this is the beginning of all hell breaking loose.
What happens is, as you write not just the songs, but as you write the albums, you have to listen very hard to what you've done, because it will talk. It will start speaking to you about what you need to do.
While Darkness on the Edge of Town is now widely heralded as a masterpiece, initial critical and commercial reaction was a little more uncertain.
Well, my reading of the reviews in 1978 was that they were somewhat mixed. One of the things that's sort of worth remembering here is that it had been about 3 years since Born to Run, and that seemed at the time like a long time. Certainly the reception of Darkness on the Edge of Town was not marked by the degree of hoopla that Born to Run had been, and that's probably was just fine with Springsteen. The critical reception of that record left one with a sense that this was a person whose future was up in the air. Was he going to have staying power? Was he going to last? Was there going to be a career here? Certainly, that had been something that that Springsteen himself had reason to doubt amid the whole sort of struggle with Mike Appel in the years before that. I don't know that Darkness on the Edge of Town was viewed as a landmark then. I think in some respects it's become viewed more so retrospectively.
There were a few rave reviews. I remember, I think it was Rolling Stone said he aims for the moon and the stars in this album, and he hits them. Some of the fans might have been nonplussed by the general tone of the record. I mean, again, if you just look at the cover and listen and look at the album title, there's a clue there that you're not in for dance fever for the next 45 minutes. I mean, this isn't going to be an ABBA type, boogie along record. I mean, he looks like he's about to kill himself on the front cover.
It was this front cover, coupled with the iconic photography of the previous album, that further highlighted the importance of image to Springsteen, the cultivation of a visual feel that would perfectly complement his work.
Is he exceptionally aware of the iconicity of the album art? Probably. Probably more aware than most because he's smarter than most.
At a certain level, Bruce is the kind of anti-image guy. I mean, he kind of seems to walk on stage and whatever he has on that day, and there's a kind of naturalness to him. But image, in fact, was extremely important to the creation of Bruce Springsteen. You know, all of those shots of him with the band kind of sunning themselves on the streets of Asbury Park, you know, that was meant to evoke a very specific place and really work with those songs. And later, you know, these kind of more brooding, almost Pacino-like images of him that you would see, that also was extremely important. He almost seemed like one of these characters in existential crisis that he was depicting, you know, on his albums.
Bruce and John Landau, and before Landau, Mike Appel, they had this idea of Bruce as a cultural icon. And lo and behold, he's managed to live up to that ideal.
My wife will often finish an argument with me by saying, "Say that in your next interview, Mr. Bruce Springsteen." Implying that a gap between an opinion I just voiced and my public self, if heard in the public forum, would shock, outrage, and disquiet my fans. She's usually right, so she wins. You know. We all have multiple selves. You know, that's just the way we're built. We got sort of this public self, public face that we show to others. I'm wearing mine right now.
That's the thing about Bruce. He delivers the goods. No matter how ridiculous the promise seems to be, he seems to be able to deliver on it. Even today, even 30 years later, it's a different promise. It's less heroic. It's less superhuman. But it's still pretty damn hard to find in real life.
Rumours began to emerge about what direction Springsteen would take next. After abandoning a project entitled The Ties That Bind, Springsteen instead chose to embrace a format that had proven to be the folly of many an artist's career, the double album.
The album that he was going to submit, it's an album called The Ties That Bind, was a single album and was very tight and concise and thematically consistent. You know, a lot of real emphasis on men and women, on the romance. And I think he's looked back at that later and said that the reason that record didn't come out is because he felt it was too personal, I think was the word he used.
Bruce's career, I think, moved in a pretty clear fashion early on. You know, the first two records were kind of these, you know, kind of discoveries of self. You know, Born to Run was a kind of grand statement. You know, Darkness was a kind of maturing and understanding that, you know, having made your grand statement, maybe even then things were not going to work out exactly the way you'd hoped. And The River, I think, is the work of a truly mature artist. You know, it's not a perfect album. I mean, there are issues with it, but I think the double album idea, I think, is a reflection of Bruce's ambitions. You know, not a kind of confusion.
I'm sure John Landau had a word in his ear about the long and rather checkered history of the double album. And a lot of those records are, of course, single albums signaling frantically to be reduced back to just that. And I'm going to do my Jazz Odyssey here on side 3 or something like that. So there's the self-indulgence card was there. But I think it's one of the better ones of its type.
It was a good idea for them to do a double album because it let them loosen up. Darkness on the Edge of Town, maybe one reason it was, in my opinion, abortive, is that they really, as formalists, they wanted to cram everything. They hadn't made a record in 3 years. They wanted to cram everything onto one disc. It can only be 45 minutes long. This is the vinyl era. Whereas The River, while not everything on it is absolutely perfect, even I suspect by their own standards, there's air in it. It's expansive. To my way of thinking, that's a record that has hit singles on it. And the other one isn't. The other one is an album. And whereas this is a bunch of songs. And I think the bunch of songs approach works very well if the songwriter is good enough. And I think in his particular case, saved his ass.
The River was released on October the 10th, 1980. Once again, Springsteen had developed his sound into something even more distinctive, a collection of both pop songs and brooding narratives that formed an epic panorama.
The obvious distinction on The River is that you have these kind of toss-off rock songs, and then you have these amazing, deep, complicated songs about commitment. And I once interviewed Bruce about that aspect of the record, and I said exactly that. I said, but it seemed to me like maybe those kind of toss-off rock songs were the music that these other characters would listen to. And he goes, yeah, that's exactly right. That those characters, when they go to the bar, when they go to the club, that's the music they like, and that's their soundtrack. It was creating their soundtrack and their lives simultaneously.
On Born to Run, you hear Springsteen one way. On Darkness, you hear him another way. And on The River, you're hearing, hey, here's everything I can do. If you thought I was this, check this out. If you thought I was that, check this out. Including the embracing of a lot of the sort of early rock and roll style stuff that he'd do in performance. It took us so long to get a live album out of Springsteen. But The River is the first place where you really felt the influence of that kind of material that he would do in concert, like, Then She Kissed Me and Mountain of Love and, Chuck Berry stuff.
I met Chuck Berry once. My manager said, gee, you're going to open on a bill for Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry. And we thought this was, forget it, I was 23 or 24, and these guys were our heroes, and so we were real excited, and the guy says, then he's going to get a band that's going to back Chuck Berry up. And we said, no, don't tell him, don't get one of the local bands. Tell him that, we'll back him up. I think my first album might have just come out around that time. So we went down to Maryland. We drove in from some overnight gig. I forget from where, but about 5 minutes before the show was time to start, the back door opens, and he comes in, he's by himself, and he's got a guitar case, and that was it. I guess he pulled up in his own car or something, didn't have anybody with him.
Sweet little 16, she's got the grown-up blues, mini skirts and hot pants. Sometimes she don't even wear shoes.
The River is the first place where you really felt the influence of that kind of material that he would do in concert, like, Then She Kissed Me and Mountain of Love and, Chuck Berry stuff and the covers that he would work into his show. I think on The River, you got that sensibility coming in.
We have basically 3 types of songs on The River. It's amazing how they fall into these categories. We have like 9 relational songs. 9 of these 20 songs deal with different types of relationships. 4 of them deal with partying. Mindless Partying, Sherry Darling, Cadillac Ranch, Ramrod. And then we have a series of 7 songs I call Life is Hell songs, where they just basically sits back and just looks at this situation and goes, my God, what is this? For example, Independence Day, where the young man's going to break away from his dad. Where's he going? No clue. What's his ambition? None.
Well, Papa, go to bed now. It's getting late. Nothing we can say is gonna change anything now. I'll be leaving in the morning from St. Mary.
On The River, you have a song like Independence Day about the importance of breaking away. It's an amazingly affecting song. Again, about this working class kid, feeling trapped in this life. They ain't gonna do to me what I watched them do to you. I mean, that's the hardest line in the song.
The only thing the character says is they're not going to do to me what they did to you. I'm leaving. But where's he going?
But they can't touch me now, and you can't touch me now. They ain't gonna do to me what I watch them do to you.
The thing about Independence Day is the way the Bruce character almost implicates himself. There's a kind of guilt about what he's doing. When he says, I know the things you wanted that you could not say, so just say goodbye, it's Independence Day. I never meant to take those things away. As if he was doing it. But in another part of the song he says, it's a changing world. There's different people coming around here now. They see things in different ways. Soon everything that we know will just be swept away. You know, it's just like there's an inevitability to this, and I've got to go, you know. I mean, this is not the stuff of pop songs. I mean, that kind of sense of a young man and his father engaging in that depth of conversation is, you know, that's the territory that Bruce defined. Nobody else does that.
Started to take a different approach on the River album. I wrote The River and Stolen Car, which were really two songs where I took on a character and I tried to walk in his shoes, and I tried to get you to walk in his shoes also.
I think that The River, the title track, is one of the best things that he has done. Basing it loosely on what his sister went through, and I think that is such a bleak yet very powerful song.
I come from down in the valley where, mister, when you're young, they bring you up to do like your daddy done. Me and Mary, we met in high school when she was just 17.
This particular record is a powerful record, but it's sort of confused thematically. And it's because these characters are confused. We've had a reckoning. Their dreams are not going to be fulfilled in the way they thought they were going to be fulfilled. And they're confused. Do we go out and race some more? What do we do?
Springsteen has talked about creating a cast of characters that he follows through. And at the point of The River, you have a sense of those characters at the point of, do I commit or do I not commit? You know, marriage, family is in the offing. And on the one hand, that seems, you know, a tremendously beautiful kind of lyrical thing. You know, some of the statements, the ties that bind, you know, these kind of statements about commitment that are so powerful and affecting. At the same time, as you get these characters who are desperately running from it because it just seems like some horrific dead end, you know, and a trap. And if you buy into it, it's like they shot you point blank, you know, that's what's waiting for you. You know, you're just better off in that stolen car going off. Now, that character's worrying about disappearing, about sort of driving off the edge of the world in a way. You know, there really is a kind of, you know, a sense of existential crisis in this music.
I'm driving a stolen car down on Eldridge Avenue. Each night I wait to get a call, but I never.
Stolen Car and Wreck on the Highway. Those are my two favorite Springsteen songs, period. And again, because of the storytelling in both of them is just mind-boggling in a way. And also, what appeals to me is the cinematic nature of his songs, and those two songs in particular.
It's fun to look at the lyric sheet for The River because it has all these little cars all over by the song titles and stuff. And Bruce Springsteen really puts these characters in these cars at this point in time. And he doesn't know necessarily where they're going.
I'm driving a stolen car on a pitch black night, and I'm telling myself I'm gonna be alright.
I think Stolen Car as one of the most profound moments in Springsteen's career, both in terms of its psychological depth, the way in which it portrays a man who's hit bottom. And I also think of it as a deeply spiritual song. And, you know, I am someone who sort of paid some attention to Springsteen's Catholic upbringing and the way in which that's affected his work. The vision of sin, the longing for redemption, the sort of fatalism that characterizes that song, I think it's really a masterpiece in his canon of work.
Perhaps the most well-known moment from the river remains Hungry Heart, a song held in esteem by both dedicated and casual fans alike, as well as being the record which gave Springsteen his first top 10 hit single.
I got a wife and kids from Baltimore, Jess. I went out for a ride and I never went back. Like a river that don't know where it's from. I took a wrong turn and I just kept going. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Lay down your money and you play your part.
I think Bruce would tell you that it's not his favorite song. He rarely plays it in concert. But again, it's clever enough, like in later years, Dancing in the Dark, to attract a whole new audience. You know, you've got mums and dads and, you know, whoever else tapping their foot to that. And good luck. You know, I'm sure John Landau loved it, but I don't think it stands the test of time very well. If you want to listen to those 50s songs, well, those almost doo-wop-like songs, there's a lot of original artists who did it a bit better, I think. It wasn't his finest hour.
I think of Hungry Heart as one of my absolute favorite Bruce Springsteen songs, and I think in some ways it showcases him at his best. I say that his best, first of all, because the song has got a wonderful melodic hook to it. It's pop music in the purest sense of that term, and you have to understand it on those terms. And if you do understand it and accept it on those terms, it's really Springsteen's shining hour as the producer of an AM radio pop single.
Hungry Heart, this is amazing, isn't it? You know, Hungry Heart introduces a uniquely Bruce Springsteen phenomena, and that is people standing on their feet cheering to dreadful scenarios. I mean, I've often talked to friends who go to the shows and say, I can't believe I'm standing here cheering a guy who hopped in his car and left his family. Just left his family. And it happens again in Born in the USA. As Americans all over the globe stand and cheer Born in the USA, and look at what the song says about the good old USA.
There's quite often a misinterpretation of Springsteen songs, Born in the USA in particular, because initially it sounds so gung-ho, and most people just, especially casual fans, just listen to the chorus. They don't pay attention to the rest of the song. They don't know it's a dark Vietnam-era song. They don't know, they don't care. And Hungry Heart, too. Yeah, it's serious subject matter done in a lighthearted way, and Dancing in the Dark as well. You know, there's so many aspects of Springsteen songs that if you just approach it as a casual listener, you don't see the depth. You don't see, I would even say, the wisdom in the songs. You just pay attention to the surface. You miss so much.
There's an extraordinary amount of ambiguity in something as triumphal sounding and you know, that has such a sing-along quality as Hungry Heart, that describes a scene so wretched and sad about you know, for instance, you know, a man who would be driven to leave his family and never come back. I mean, this is the Springsteen duality, and it's, you know, I mean, most specific manifestation of, you know, triumphal music wed to the saddest themes.
What kills me about Hungry Heart is at the end of the song, the guy talks about how everybody needs a family, everybody needs a home. He just left his. You know, so what's up with that? Confused characters.
Everybody needs a place to rest. Everybody wants to have a home. Don't make no difference what nobody said. Ain't nobody wanna be alone.
I think that amid that sense of complexity and that sense of sorrow that drives a hungry heart, you also have this sense of longing and this sense of joy. Again, this sort of joy of being alive, this sense of humanity, even when people are doing stupid, destructive, painful things. The sense of affection that he as a singer conveys, and as even the guys from the Turtles and the harmony of that song. I think it's such a complete package. It's such a satisfying 3-minute experience. It's really, to me, one of Bruce Springsteen's greatest gifts that he's given his listeners.
The release of The River was followed up by a huge tour of America and Europe, an odyssey which bolstered Springsteen's already legendary reputation as a live artist.
When it comes to the live performance, I think that kind of shows him in all his glory, and it shows, the sort of direct line from, great soul artists like James Brown and, Sam Moore and the Rolling Stones and, everything that he came up on. It's all in the show, both in his showmanship, in his energy, in his band leading, in his song selection.
Well, he just don't stand there. He works. He works. He's sincere about what he does. He likes it. He likes his job. It's a good job to have. It must be very tiring on him, and, he's getting older too. He's 6 months younger than me, so he's got to feel it every once in a while too. But he's constantly doing something, and that's him. Constantly writing songs, and God, we'd have parties. Everybody be out in the main room. He'd be in the bedroom with the guitar, strumming away. That's the way he is. Prolific.
What a dynamic performer! I can't believe that this guy did these 3.5-hour, 4-hour performances when he was younger. It is one of a kind.
I think the myth is that he's, played 4.5-hour shows every night for the last 30 years. Well, no, but I mean, the early shows were 2 hours or 2.5 hours when other acts were giving you 45 minutes. And I think that during the course of that 2.5 hour show, he's giving everything. He's putting it all out there. And the next night, you can come back and see it again, and he's going to put everything out there again, but maybe in a different way. You could hear the same song in a different arrangement. He never plays the same set list twice. The energy and the drive and the passion is always there to connect with everybody in that room. And he tends to throw in something that you haven't seen before, night after night after night. And so if that's just 5 minutes, well, if you're a follower, if this is what you dig, that 5 minutes is worth it,
It was this generosity of spirit in Springsteen's live and recorded work, something he has maintained to this day, that has guaranteed him a loyal fan base who would be the envy of most other performers.
His fan base is extremely important. He's loyal to them, they're loyal to him, and anybody who knows Springsteen knows that he takes his responsibility to his fans seriously. And what I always found amusing was that he always refers to what he does as a job. It's work. And he always wanted to be useful. So in that sense, he is useful to his fans, and his fans are useful to him. So it's very much a two-way street. It's not the kind of relationship where the artist is on stage and hands off. He is just the opposite, and I think over the years it hasn't changed, and the fans know that.
I think there's an element of this that we need to think about, and that's sort of generational. That Springsteen came of age at a time when one could build an audience over time. Bruce Springsteen in the 21st century would not have the same lead, the same leash, the same room that he had in those days. The music business is so much different, and there's so many more competing imperatives for young people's time and attention. So Springsteen has lasted because he's a very gifted person, and Springsteen has lasted because he has attracted loyal fans, and Springsteen has survived because he's a very lucky man and arrived at the right time, and the circumstances were right for him.
And I think once you've got that traction, it's almost yours to lose, you know, that sort of fan base. You've got to really almost go out of your way to alienate people, and he never did that. He was always smart enough. If you do that long enough, and you put yourself on the line long enough, and he did both of those, you're bound to attract a following and word of mouth and everything else. I think that put him in good stead when he decided to experiment a bit on the records.
Springsteen's experimentation was to branch off in arguably his most daring direction yet. A self-imposed period of exile produced a series of demo sessions for the next album. While versions were recorded with the E Street Band, it was decided that the solo versions carried more resonance. For the first time in his career, Springsteen's recorded output would not have the backing of his usual accomplices.
It's hard to know what would have happened to Bruce without the E Street Band, but the E Street Band, from the beginning, you know, kind of got woven into his shows. I mean, not just as players, but as characters. It's almost as if this world of Asbury Park is what was traveling around. It wasn't just a band. It was this entire world that Bruce had created, and, you know, this cast of characters was traveling along with them. You know, so eventually everybody would get their long, extended introduction.
The E Street Band are integral to Bruce's success. They're one of his instruments. He speaks through them. They're a perfect instrument for interpreting the work. That's what Bruce Springsteen ought to sound like. And it was ironic that when he broke up the band, which was fine with me, I'm all for artists trying new things, the sound he created sounded almost indistinguishable from the E Street Band. It just wasn't as good. So that's his sound, and you know, and I think he's it doesn't work for all of his music, but I think when he wants to have a rock and roll band, it's, you know, you couldn't sound any better than that playing Bruce Springsteen music.
As well as the practicalities of recording, the aesthetic of the next album would also prove yet another marked difference for Springsteen. Nebraska was released on September the 20th, 1982. Its stark, haunting and lonely sound has made it one of Springsteen's most distinctive albums, as well as going on to enthrall and influence a generation of singer-songwriters.
Each song can stand on its own with just a guitar and a voice, and it's hard to write songs that can really stand up over time for so many years, just with just sitting down at a campfire and playing an instrument and singing to people. And so he's got the quality of great lyrics and great melodies, and there's a lot of space. And Nebraska is beautiful because it is so spacious.
My name is Joe Roberts. I work for the state. I'm a sergeant out of Burtonville. Barracks number.
You know, it has the quality of being a thematic and whole, and that the production, which is so stark and 4-track and spare, lends it a quality that you know, that confers gravity, and the songs are great, and the songs are beautiful.
Well, I chased them through them county roads. Well, a sign said Canadian border 5 miles from here. I pulled over to the side of the highway and watched his taillights disappear.
A lot of younger musicians look to Nebraska, you know, because I think for younger musicians, and particularly like sort of, you know, indie musicians, getting through the scale of what the Bruce idea has become requires a certain amount of work, whereas Nebraska is just there for them.
I was turned on to Nebraska a few years ago when a bunch of people did a cover record of it, and so I heard their versions, and then I was interested in it and listened to his. At that time I was doing pretty stripped down 4-track demos and writing in a more folk narrative style than I do now, and that was a great time for me to hear those because, like I said, it was just a pure song. Great melodies, great lyrics, and a lot of interesting guitar parts that make up good, solid songs, and that's what I needed to hear at that time when I was doing real simple, stripped-back records and also demos in particular, just getting it out on my demo. Like, I was using a 4-track to record my demos for years, and that's what he did Nebraska on, so it was cool to relate to that way. I think he's been a boon for American music in general. It's just great when there are people like Bruce Springsteen who can come along and raise the bar for everyone and really push people to find their true voice, whatever voice that is, and to express it with honesty. And I think that honesty tends to be a quality that people like all around the world.
They made some very interesting choices in terms of how to put that music out. You know, I think that for decades now there's been this legend of Electric Nebraska and what Electric Nebraska sounds like. Well, I think we know what Electric Nebraska sounds like in a lot of ways because it sounds like Born in the USA. I mean, Born in the USA is Electric Nebraska in some ways. With the Nebraska material that was released, we're very lucky, and he was very lucky, that his original demos that had that really singular, one-of-a-kind magic of sounding as haunted and desolate as they do, that they were able to clean that cassette up enough to get it out. I think there's a world in which they weren't able to make that happen. There's a world in which they would have had to have re-recorded those songs, and either we wouldn't have Nebraska in the form that it's in the form of like a really dark, haunting thing, or they would have tried to recreate that and failed, and it wouldn't be the legendary record that it is.
The only other record I can think of that came about in a comparable way would be one like Lucky Town, which also had sort of an element of spontaneity to it. Perhaps less satisfying, although I do think that was a better record than people recognized at the time. But in any case, I think we all knew when Nebraska came out that this was different and that this was special. And that this was perhaps a significant step on a journey that was very much ongoing.
Springsteen's new sound was met with a fresh contextual comparison that he was following in the tradition of American musical figureheads such as Woody Guthrie.
I really wanted to find something good about Woody Guthrie's music. There's reams of stuff written about Woody Guthrie. I've read 3 books about Woody Guthrie. 4. There's nothing about his music. Nothing. People talk about his words forever. And yet the fact of the matter is that there is a sprightliness about the way he delivers a song. Springsteen can't do it.
Picked up a hammer in his little right hand. That's gonna be the death of me. Hammer will be the death of me. Hammer will be the death of me.
There's a sense in which, yeah, I think that Springsteen is a better lyricist than Guthrie. And he certainly, his worldview is more complicated. But he's not as funny. Funny does not come easy to him, especially in songs. On stage it does. Not when he's writing songs for some reason, that's a negative. And so you really have to want to listen to that record to listen to it. It's not going to make you listen to it. You're going to have to say, yes, Bruce, I want to hear what you have to say about this stuff.
Nebraska was by far Springsteen's darkest album to date, an uncomfortable medley of songs encompassing everything from serial killers, doomed gangsters, and downtrodden all-American rejects.
Bruce Springsteen likes to say that his songwriting endeavors to fathom the deep water from the well. That he tries to go way down in that well and come up with something that resonates within himself, because if it resonates with himself, it'll resonate with his audience, is what he says. And then he goes on to say, that when you create something, you didn't know how you did it, that's when you really made something. And I tell you what, some deep water is best left not disturbed. And he sure disturbs it on Nebraska. You know the story of its creation. He locked himself away, so to speak. He was in his bedroom in his house, and I believe it was in Red Bank, New Jersey. He has a little 4-track TAC there, and he produces these demos all on his own. It must have been really psychologically taxing for him to go there and do this.
I think he was again reacting. He'd done that big tour, of course, too, hadn't he? Been all over the world in 80, 81. And I think there was a conscious sense of pulling back for a while. And the other thing about Nebraska, of course, it's right at the high or low point of the first Reagan presidency. And I was living in the States at the time. It was not a happy time, rather similar to today in many ways. It was very much a have or have not period in American history. And you had dear old Nancy Reagan ordering in $500,000 worth of china for the White House kitchen, and you had the highest unemployment rate since the 30s. So might have been a symbolic thing, but nonetheless, those two stories coming side by side are not one of America's shining hours. So I think Bruce is obviously concerned about that disparity and about the haves and have-nots, and you've got a large shadow of the early Reagan years is what motivated him, I think, to do that.
As to Springsteen's state of mind at the time of Nebraska, we now know, because he's told us years after the fact, that he was depressed, clinically depressed, actually seeking some form of psychological counseling. Of course, you don't need to be a licensed clinician to suspect that Springsteen was in a dark mood circa 1981, 82, because there's a brooding quality to those songs that defines them in a very powerful and profound sense.
I think Nebraska is utterly fascinating, but I don't view Nebraska in the order of presentation that the record presents it. Springsteen demonstrated with Darkness on the Edge of Town how he can lay out a very systematic record. I think to unpack Nebraska, you have to sort of rearrange things. And when you do that, it's really coherent. For example, Open All Night. I see that as the lead song of this piece. It's a direct connection back to the previous records. It's another Springsteen character in another car racing across the New Jersey landscape to his baby that night. Nothing really negative there. He loves her. His boss hates him, so he put him on the night shift. So he's driving late at night, shifting his gears, racing across New Jersey. And then the whole record changes. So after we sort of establish the connection to the past through this Open All Night, we move to these really materialistic accounts, Mansion on a Hill and Used Car. Whereas, I mean, can you imagine what kids lay out in high grass to watch other kids play? Who gets in a car with their father at night, goes down a dirt road or a back road to watch the happenings in somebody else's house? And that's what's in the song, Mansion on the Hill.
At night, my daddy take me and we ride through the streets of a town so silent and still. Park on a back road along the highway side. Look up at that mansion on
These people covet this mansion and their lifestyle. These people believe that money and material possessions will bring you happiness. It's a fantasy. Then we go to used car. What's wrong with a used car? Bruce Springsteen's character hates used cars. And it's interesting what the character says. When I win the lottery, I'll never ride in a used car again. And basically tells the neighbors to kiss his ass at the end of the song. Now that's really insightful. The Mansion on the Hill, the used car bit. These people never talk about getting a job, getting an education, saving money, or doing anything industrious to get things. They think they can go to a casino and win big, they can win the lottery, they can do a favor for a friend up in New York City, and this will bring them what they need, the wealth that they think they need to be happy. So when we look at Nebraska, and we have this connection with Open All Night, and then these two songs about this materialism they hold, then we have two eruptions, two responses to this. One is denial, and the other is murder and mayhem.
The struggle for identity and the search for self that Bruce describes on these records is lived. That's what makes them so compelling. You know, there was a kind of willingness to go there, a willingness to really dramatize that and create songs out of it that it's hard to find anywhere else.
Springsteen's writing has never been autobiographical. I think there have been certainly autobiographical elements that come in here and there. But I think one thing that he's been very, very good at is observing and finding other people's stories and finding elements of other people's lives and stories to work into his own music.
Atlantic City is quintessential Springsteen characters from this age. What do? They take all their money out of their savings and go to the casinos in Atlantic City. They're going to make it big by spending their savings. And what happens at the end of the song? He's going to do a little favor for a friend, going to make some fast money. He's in denial.
I've been looking for a job, but it's hard to find. Down here it's just winners and losers, and don't get caught on the wrong side of that line. Well, I'm tired of coming out on this losing end. So honey, last night I met this guy, and I'm gonna do a little favor for him. Well, I guess everything dies, baby, that's a fact. Maybe everything that dies someday comes back.
So we have this denial here, which is a better road than the murder and mayhem, where people just lose it.
Nebraska itself is a great song about the Charles Starkweather murder spree. And of course, Terrence Malick, Badlands is based on that.
For this song, I remember I'd been moved by the Terrence Malick film Badlands, and I got interested in the story. There was a book out at the time called Carol about a girl that was a part, Charlie Starkweather's partner. And I, just out of the blue, I decided to call the newspaper in Nebraska. I called up, and the woman who had reported the story was still there 30 years later. So I got to speak to her. And she was just friendly and helpful. Well, the song is, you can put together a lot of detail, but unless you pull something up out of yourself, it's just going to lay flat on the page. You got to find out what you have in common with that character, no matter who they are or what they did.
My girl Holly and I decided to kill ourselves. Same way I did her dad. Big decision.
Kit left a record playing over and over for the district attorney to find. He was gambling for time.
That's what it was like. Pop.
her button. Me and her went for a ride, sir, and some people died.
This mass murderer runs off with this, beautiful young girl and kills her family and a bunch of other people. And Bruce looks at this kind of violence, the violence that he would sketch on earlier records, like on Darkness at the Edge of Town and in A Song Like Factory. Somebody's going to get it tonight. This kind of sense of desperation that underlies the working life or underlies a certain kind of working class life in America. And it just explodes on this record. And what's the explanation? Well, he borrows it from Flannery O'Connor from A Good Man Is Hard to Find, which is, I guess there's just a meanness in this world.
They want to know why I did what I did. Sir, I guess it's just meanness in this world.
The meanness in the world finds itself inside of you, and then there's an explosion. And that's the danger. That's the scary element on Nebraska.
Riding through Nebraska and Wyoming, killing 10 innocent people, no remorse. Well, Judge, I guess it's just a meanness in this world. And this guy is so out of it that he requests the judge to let his pretty baby sit by his side when they electrocute him. I mean, these people have taken the materialistic angst that I think is present in other parts of this record and gone off the deep end with it. And that's why I say this is an eruption in the Springsteen canon, that after seeing what happened in Darkness on the Edge of Town, reinforcing some of that with the river, it just blows up at this point. These people have lost it all, not that they really had anything to begin with, and now they're seeking revenge, or they're in denial.
There is none of that sense of you are tragic, but you are a hero on that record. None of that at all. There's no, in your defeat, you have achieved transcendence stuff. It's, you're defeated, and that sucks. And to my way of thinking, that's better. Because you know it isn't going to stop there. Because it's not you're defeated, you're dead. And you're therefore going to heaven. You know? It's just you're defeated, and that's really bad. And what are you going to do about it? Implicitly speaking. It works better for that reason.
I think Nebraska is the pinnacle of many things. The pinnacle of his literary songwriting, the pinnacle of his cinematic, if you want to call it that, style of songwriting. I think so much came together on Nebraska, and then you have the iconic photograph on the album cover, and then you have just the voice, his voice itself, the voice that says so much to so many people, and in a sense, it's the voice, his voice becoming the voice of the voiceless.
Nebraska and Tunnel of Love, I think, are sort of emotionally the truest Bruce Springsteen albums. I think that they have the least amount of artifice, and they're Bruce sort of speaking most directly through his music.
I didn't really write very well about men and women until '87, and so I was 37 at the time, and I wasn't doing very well either, so maybe that had something to do with it. But the Tunnel of Love came along. I wrote a real record about kind of men and women and what that's about, and kind of the cornerstones of the record were the issues of identity and love. Who am I, and where am I going to be? Where do I belong? Where am I going to end up?
There's a lack of bombast. There's a lack of posing. There's a lack of, he's not really thinking how's this going to feel on stage. I'm guessing there, I don't know. But I think that there are sort of simple emotional truths put with such eloquence, but also unflinchingness in both of those records that they're so good they're hard to listen to sometimes.
Nebraska, while subject to rapturous critical reception, nevertheless attracted rather uninspiring sales figures. Yet there was a dividing point on the way, an album which would take Springsteen to a higher plateau. In 1985, Born in the USA was released. In a move as detached from Nebraska as could be imaginable, Bruce Springsteen now appeared to be the emblem of stadium rock.
Messages keep getting clearer. Radio's on and I'm moving around the place.
It was, a turning point and a breakthrough in a lot of ways, in that Springsteen went from, being a rock star to being, truly a household name, and, loosely speaking, everybody in the world knows who he is, and, there were, 7 hits off that record. That is, super stardom on the level of Michael Jackson at the time, or whatever else. So it's hard to turn back from that, and I think they knew that going in. I think they had a sense of what was about to happen, and I think they had a choice of, do we make this happen? Do we sort of take this to the next level? And I think they decided, yeah, this is what we want. So they made it happen.
USA defined Springsteen as an American icon. And everything since then has been done in that context. I don't think of Born in the USA as a watershed record in terms of Springsteen's artistic vision. I don't think there's any breakthrough songs there, with the possible exception of Born in the USA. But of course, that song was originally part of the Nebraska sessions. Certainly, the decision to record it the way he did was a spark of inspiration. The significance of Born in the USA is much more as a commercial and cultural phenomenon rather than an artistic or a musical turning point.
Whatever the consensus on Springsteen's work since, nothing can deny the innovative, iconic and intriguing nature of his work from 1978 to 1982. A series of records that have only added to his truly unique legacy.
They'll be viewed as sort of the birth of a great songwriter. I think history will look back on his songwriting as much as anything else. And that's a big statement, because this is one heck of a performer.
That's the thing that is most moving to me about those early records. You know, taking the lives of people who were not on the cultural stage and demonstrating how those lives have every bit as much dignity and beauty and lyricism and hope and as anyone's lives. And that's, I think, Bruce's lesson. And, you know, as long as anybody cares to go back and, you know, listen to Darkness on the Edge of Town or The River, I mean, these are great, great records. They're, you know, they're in the canon now.
In the second half of the 20th century, this country changed in a very fundamental and a very important way, and I've thought that Springsteen was a bellwether of this, and I think he's going to be remembered in the tradition of Woody Guthrie and in the tradition of Dylan and as part of that tradition, which I'm sad to say I don't know that someone will follow Springsteen at the level of popularity or the level of currency, because I think we may have lost that forever. And that's what I think of when I think of Springsteen as the last link in that chain. And I hope that's wrong, but I wonder if that will be his legacy.